Hello and welcome to DigFin VOX, Voices in Digital Finance. I'm your host, Jame DiBiasio. If you enjoy our content, like, share, subscribe, let the YouTube algorithm know about it. My guest today is Miles Wen, co-founder and CEO of Fano Labs, a Hong Kong startup focusing on artificial intelligence uses in RegTech. As I spoke with Miles, I was very interested to understand his take on how banks are really taking advantage, or not, of AI and RegTech solutions. Miles Wen, welcome to DigFin VOX.
Thank you.
Great to have you. I'm looking forward to this because you're a deep tech founder in Hong Kong, doing a lot of work in RegTech and financial services. So it's a hot area, right? Why don't you just give us a very brief introduction to Fano Labs and the story? You came out of one of the universities here, deep research arm. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. So I'm Miles, I'm CEO and founder of Fano Labs. So we're actually a spin-off from the University of Hong Kong, that's where me and my co-founders, we used to work and conduct research on. About in 2015, we decided to spin it off from the university and run the company as a commercial company, so that we try to commercialize what we built from the research lab into the industry, with the hope that we can bring some real impact with that technology to the industry. So we're actually an AI company, but we're actually very specialized in one particular area about AI, where we train models, we build machines that comprehend and process human languages. So in particular, we train machines that process audios, a whole bunch of audios, and we get machines to tell us
people's voices.
Yes, audio. Yes, the voices. So we basically train machines to tell us in the audios how many different speakers are there, who are they, at what time did they speak, what do they say, and what do they mean by saying that? So that's how we turn everything into insights, business insights that bring value to enterprises.
So by listening to the voices, what you do is the computer, I guess, converts that into a text?
Text plus insights. So we also we don't just give it a text, but we also give you lots of information about the tones inside, like what's the tone, how fast people speak, how loud people speak, and then what's the language being spoken by that particular person, and who are they. And we also try to extract key information, like what's being said in there. Did the person mention anything particular, like a product name, a stock name, a particular instance in the market, or something of your interest of the users? Yes. So that's something we do.
And that insight, is that something that the computer is able to generate itself, or do you have to then have some process by which you scrub that conversation to generate that insight?
We do it both. The machines actually give us the raw materials, give us this is like someone is speaking very loudly. But what does it mean by speaking loudly, right? So that can be mapped into something in the business area, like somebody is a loudspeaker, but is it loud by nature, or is it loud because it's angry? So that's something that we need a human intervention to do an interpretation of what does it mean by what does it mean by having the signal identified by the machine. So so that's actually there's a human in the loop, something we call human in the loop, is actually we machine generate all the raw materials, all the raw signals, but someone in the middle needs to process that and turn that thing into something the business can actually use.
Is there a point where the AI will develop where the computer will be able to do that kind of analysis on its own?
I don't think so. Because one of the things we come across is actually, if you want to train machines, right? Someone needs to train a machine. It's gonna be our humans. We need to find humans to train the machines. But the thing is, in the enterprise space where we are working on, especially in very specialized industries like RegTech, first of all, the role is evolving. At some point, even in a large bank, there are only a handful of people who are especially knowledge about what's going on, what are the traders talking about. So these are only a very small number of these kind of people. They don't have the time to train the machines, and we don't have enough data. So we don't see us going to the point where we can have enough data from these high professionals to train machines. So that's why we say no. I don't think it will happen. Well, machine will stay we tend to say that in the banking sector, we tend to tell our clients that you think about AI as like entry-level stuff, like very entry-level stuff. They can do the work, they can do the labor, and do it in scale and fast and cheap. But they are not like they're not going to be like getting a certificate. Cannot be like they cannot get a license from SSC to sell stuff. That requires way too much extra knowledge. That's way too much for machines.
You're providing this massive kind of 24/7, no healthcare, no vacations intern workforce.
You're right. Yeah. That's the level.
Okay.
Yeah. And then basically you want more interns, just crank more power in there. That's it.
Right. Okay. So you can have 3 interns. You can have 3,000 interns. It scales like that, but they're still all going to be interns.
You're right.
Okay. So with this, when we talk about audio recognition, deciphering different languages, understanding not just the words that people say, but perhaps the context or the intonation, how does this get used in real world applications?
That's a good question. Actually, nowadays, we're primarily seeing our technologies getting adopted in the financial industry as a RegTech solution. Mm-hmm. So here's a little background. So in the financial industry, regardless whether you're a private bank, a retail bank, wholesale bank, or a security firms or insurance firms, whenever you have a licensed personnel selling an investment product to a customer, you can't just sell any product to anybody, right? There's lots of regulations about what you can sell. One of the key points is actually when you sell a product, you're a facilitator. There are lots of risk exposures that you have to tell the customer. You have to work with the customer for a risk questionnaire so that you make sure that the customer knows what they're buying and they're okay with the risks. Like for instance, that's a product, it's a savings product, it's a deposit that you're never gonna lose your principal, then it's okay. Some people may like it. But if you're selling a product that's like a warrant, there's a chance you may subject to margin calls, you may lose everything, and you're gonna owe extra money to people.
Right.
Then you need to make sure the customer, the buyer knows that. They understand that, they understand what the dynamics, they understand the risks, and they really know what they're doing. So, but the problem is actually when it comes to the actually financial product, the actual selling process, it's very hard for you to know what's being talked in there. Sometimes it's your RMs, it's too junior to know what's going on. Sometimes forget about telling a customer about a particular risk. Sometimes the customer say, hey, I know it, just stop talking, right? Something to push you to do it. And sometimes just like the product's way too complicated. There's too many things about it you have to go through. You just forgot. But the thing is, as a staff, a personnel from the bank, as licensed personnel from the bank, facilitating the sale, if you forget to mention some very key risk points to the customer and the customer lost money eventually, you're at fault. You might have to cover the costs, you may have the losses for the customer. So that's why the regulators, not only in Hong Kong, but also on a global scale, that basically says, if you are facilitating this kind of high risk transactions or any kind of a transaction of a financial product, first of all, you need to make sure that the entire conversation is recorded, and you need to dispatch some personnel to listen behind the scene, at least do some sample calls to make sure that sales process is okay. You did not have any mis-selling conducts over there, and the customer clearly understand what's being sold in there, and the product being sold, it's suitable to what the customer actually needed. So, but the thing is, actually, imagine there are people, their whole job is sitting in an office and listening to tapes of people talking to each other day in and day out. It's painful, it's expensive, and people will quit, to be honest. Like you keep doing that, people are gonna quit. It's a very boring process. But even when they're doing that, there's still like insufficient coverage. It's impossible for you to listen to 100% of what all the transactions that's being happening over there. It's way too expensive.
Yes.
That comes to a point where this kind of mis-selling sometimes still happen. It still got missed out. No matter how much money banks spend, they can't catch up with it. Well, whenever they face that, the regulators, if the investor lost money, the regulator will come up and say, hey, you're not doing your work properly, because we have a clear guideline. You need to make sure that whenever you sell, you're following the full processes. You're very compliant with our requirements. So that's where our technology came in to help. So over the past couple of years, we basically say, you know what, just stop hiring people to do the sample checks. It's painful. It's not working. How about using AIs? Like just would listen to 100% of your calls, and that's like 100 times, 1,000 times faster than humans. And we flag every single instance where the machine says there's something, I feel like we are missing something.
Right.
And we keep this kind of filtered out, the flagged out audios to a real human, like a real professional risk manager or a control manager, business risk manager or control manager would say, hey, these are the 10 recordings from yesterday's transactions that the machine thinks have an issue. And here's what the machine thinks. And you get the senior managers to review the things only. They just review the parts where a machine flagged it out. If the machine made a mistake, it's fine, just forget about it. If the machine was right, you know what to do. You can follow up properly. They actually empower their people. Like if for same number of people you hire, that for same number of professionals a bank hire, you can cover like 100 times more. The kind of surveilling on the audios, the sales processes, etc.
And I guess they use this for training purposes or to improve the quality of their RMs, right? In the example that you're giving. How unique is this sort of thing, Miles? I mean, I've chatted with a variety of fintech companies over the years. There's others in this space. Are you building something that you could consider a moat in a business concept that nobody can really get across and challenge you? Are you fighting it out in what is sort of a commoditized arena? How difficult is it to maintain a distinction in this business?
Yep. In our particular space, so this is actually very particular to Asia, to the Asian market and APAC market in particular, like Hong Kong and Singapore, is whenever our technology is about processing human languages, but our specialties is processing situations where most people are multilingual, like most people speak at least 2 to 3 different languages. And when people are multilingual, so there's a very special phenomenon that will happen is actually people might mix languages together. They'll be talking to each other in Chinese and they'll mix in lots of English words in the middle. And it'll also happen where 3 people are talking and at the very beginning they're talking to each other in Chinese, and all of a sudden, for whatever reason, they switch language to English. They could be like someone else some non-Chinese speakers join the conversation, so they all switch to Chinese. They all switch to English all of a sudden. That's not that kind of problem does not happen in the States or in China, but it happens a lot in Hong Kong and Singapore. In those areas, people are multilingual, and it happens. Now the challenge becomes, for the machine, how do we catch up? Like in this technology, thinking about the technology you have in your phone, like Siri, right? You need to select a language first. If you select, let's say, English, and you try to talk to it, say Chinese to the phone, it doesn't work. It doesn't recognize you. It's not at all. But in our particular scenario, we don't necessarily know. We don't even know what the language people are speaking until the customer starts talking. And even if we know what language is being spoken, when the customer starts talking, he might change the language somewhere in the middle of the conversation. So we're actually very specialized in processing technologies where processing audios where this kind of phenomenon happen. Like people, they come in speaking unknown languages we need to detect. And when the people actually come in to speak 2 languages at the same time, we can still recognize it's the same person. Here's the language they speak, and here's what they said, and here's what they mean by saying that. That's our strength.
Yeah, that's your sweet spot. How defensible is that though? I mean, what would it take for a larger company in the AI space just to decide they want to add that on? I mean, how long would it take them to be able to have that capability?
I think for anyone trying to do what we do right now, I think it will take them at least a year or 2. Mm-hmm. I mean, for large corps. But in the meantime, we're also improving. So I think we're like a couple of years ahead in technology, because technology is actually, it's hard in a couple of ways. First of all, it's difficult because you need to change the the underlying assumptions when you build a technology. So when you train a machine, do you expect it to know a language before recognizing, or do we not expect expectation? So that's fundamental technology-wise. That's the difference. If you move from traditional technology to what we're doing, you need to change the entire thing from ground up. The second part is actually you also need lots of data. You can't make it up. You have to have lots of data, how people mix language together, how people switch language on the fly in this particular region. And by the way, that's also extremely localized because it's very common in Hong Kong. You see people mixing Chinese and English, right? But people don't necessarily mix Chinese with, let's say, Arabic, right? They don't mix Arabic with Chinese, vice versa, or Chinese with, let's say, German. It doesn't happen a lot. So this kind of combination doesn't work. But when it comes to English, Chinese mixture, what would be the pronunciation will be different. The accents will kick in. And the words, they don't mix any word. They mix some selected words. What is the small words that tend to mix together? And when they switch, how do we make sure that we know that the person is switching language, especially when it comes to some people with a very strong Chinese accent. When they speak English, there's strong Chinese accents. How do you know that he's trying to speak English instead of trying to, still sticking with Chinese? So those are things that actually require lots of data. So we'll be in this space. I think right now, most of the industry can think about we have the largest database, for this kind of mixed language, multilingual, speeches in this part, particularly for Hong Kong, Singapore, and many parts of Asia. So I think even if somebody trying to come in and compete with us, I think first of all, they need to figure out how do we change the technology, fundamental technology. They need to invest lots of heavily in R&D to do it. And after that, they need to figure out where do they get the data. So it takes years to build up the knowledge base, the database of data, capture different scenarios.
Let me appeal to your appeal to your inner nerd and talk about the technology itself, the AI, and what is it? I mean, I know there's different types of AI. I'm not an engineer or a computer software programmer or a specialist. So, what's interesting about the way that you're using AI, and how would you describe it?
I think the way we do it is actually, this can go a little bit technical. So technology changes. So right now, the majority of our tech was built on deep learning, but that's since 7 years ago, we were already doing deep learning. But the technology, even deep learning, is evolving in so many different ways.
And
so
how would you define deep learning?
So that's not a definition. It's just about something on deep neural networks. Neural networks is one of the algorithms that we use. It's one of the ways for us to model, a learning process, right? It's like we simulate human brain neurons, but it's actually a network-based kind of a mapping function that we train the data.
It's like a layering of many AIs. It's like a layer cake of AIs on top of each other to create something that would resemble synapses in the brain, as opposed to a two-dimensional tree of if-thens. Is that right?
Yes, and we do lots of convolutions in the process.
Okay, so deep learning, the use of neural networks, that's what you began with 7 years ago, but now you're saying that that's a bit old hat, or you've moved on from that. So where has this gone?
It's still fundamentally deep learning. Fundamentally, it's the same, but the details have all changed. So remember, it's actually the framework has been there for a couple of years, but all the details have evolved in so many different ways. Like a couple of things, like how do we model? In our role, we have to build machines to model the signals. The way we model signals has changed in so many different ways. In the early days, we use some Markovian models, but now we're doing something completely different. And we also about the language models. In the early days, we use different kind of ways to model languages, like the different ways to predict what kind of words should we give you. And that also changed over the years, which it basically says because especially when it comes to multilingual, grammar doesn't work, syntax doesn't work. The word can come in from different languages. How do we piece them everything together? These are all small details have changed over the years, but they are built on the same technology background that we laid about 7 years ago, but small details all evolved. Yeah.
And what does that mean in terms of the skills that you need in your business, or working with, some of the software people in the banks? Are people up to speed on these models? Do you have to kind of train the client to be able to understand them, or the client doesn't necessarily need to know this? It's more just how you deliver a final product.
Right now, when it comes to us dealing with the banks, is mostly just banks don't have to, they need to understand what's going on for their internal compliance requirements. And also because HKMA's guidance about when banks adopt AI technologies, they need to be able to explain what's going on. That's the regulatory requirements. So we'll give them answers about what's going on behind the scene. But when it comes to actual usage, they just use our product. They don't necessarily have to learn about machine learning. They don't have to understand the deep learning and all that. They just look at our product and just make use of it and bring business value to the business.
Can you talk about any of the banks that are using your services today?
Yeah, we have a couple of banks that are actually they go on and talk with us together. So Standard Chartered Bank is one of the banks actually they very actively collaborate with us, and also JP Morgan is one of our clients as well. We're very close with each other, and Hong Kong Bank also work with us among many others. So I think many of the top guys in Hong Kong are our clients, not just Hong Kong but also on the world stage as well.
how scalable is what you do? Not in the sense of doing more and more stuff, putting more interns on this one, this audio case as we refer to it, but are there other things that you could be doing if you're working with one of these large banks? Is there other business lines or other use of deep learning AI that you're trying to apply to new types of business cases?
Yeah, sure. We're actually doing lots of those use cases. Typically, when we sell a product. So our product fundamentally is just like we analyze the audios. We analyze audios. We'll give you different kind of insights. And once we start collaborating with the bank, we actually expand the business cases together with the bank. Mm-hmm. For instance, we started out, I mentioned that when we started out, we checked the sales process. Is there any selling misconduct? And I mentioned we've been doing quality management where we monitor how your customer service people are serving the customers and whether they're happy or not. And we're also doing cases like we also help them analyze this kind of interactions between customers and relation managers and try to do a differentiation, like why some of our RMs can sell products better, more effectively than the other RMs, right? What's the difference? How differently are they when they engage customers? What are the common patterns for successful sales, like successful bankers that can close deals? And what are the patterns for not so successful bankers? And so that we'll give banks insights about how do they improve their sales training process, their RM training process, so junior people can become more successful inside a bank as well. And we also have cases where we look at the customer service, the inbound customer service calls. We're trying to identify what are customers who are about to churn, like they're about to leave, they're not happy with this. I'm gonna move to another bank. People talk about it, from time to time when you're very mad or call a bank, you don't get your service out, right. So you might leave. So, but that's the leaking bucket. You don't get it. Banks don't get to see it because that's stopped at whoever pick up the phone call. Right now, let's get AI to listen to every one of them. Try to find out what are the customers who might leave, who have high chance of leaving, so you can have someone else contact the customer, try to do a retention. And we're also starting to kind of application use cases where we analyze these recordings and we tell them, hey, whether there are sales opportunities. Like one of the very typical use cases we are doing with one of the loan issuing banks right now is we analyze the inbound calls. The customer called about mortgage, right? They say, I'm going to buy a house, I'm going to take a mortgage. Tell me about your bank, your bank's offering. So call about that. And there are lots of questions they ask about this mortgage, but most of the time they don't buy, right? They talk about it, they ask questions, say, oh, let me think about it. And they maybe ask you, what about how do you compare with your competitor bank, something like that. And that's it. Most of the time, these kind of a conversation do not get follow-ups because it's a support agency. They just give you answers. They may drop a note to some sales, but that's the end of it. You may not really necessarily follow up. But right now, it's basically every time a customer calls, we say, hey, you know what? Let's get machines to dig out for you. So these are the customers who called you about mortgage or some sort of loans or some other kind of credit cards and etc. And here's what they asked about. We bring this information, not only we don't just tell the salespeople that, hey, this guy called you about this particular product. We also give you a context. Here are the questions that customer asked about yesterday. He was comparing with this bank. He was particularly interested on these couple of aspects of the bank. Now call the customer back, try to see what else. Don't just sell, right? Just do a warm call. Say, you called me yesterday. Here we have more information for you. How can I help you more? So on and so forth.
How good are banks how good are banks at integrating AI solutions that fintechs like you guys deliver and achieving these bigger goals the way you describe them? I mean, it sounds awesome, right? I mean, just plug this in, and then you guys can do some follow-up work, and you can make huge difference to your bottom line, or to your customer satisfaction, whatever is your goal. In reality, does it really work that way?
Yeah, actually, we do have quite a few challenges, especially working with the big international banks. But it's not about technology itself. It's about because banks is actually a very serious business, and typically banks' IT systems, the software system, has the highest standard across the entire industry because that's people's money. That could be people's life savings, right? They're very high security standard. They have very high internal standards about what they're going to use, and they need to have lots of measures in place. So for whatever technology banks adopt, they need to have a measure to say, what if it fails, right? They need to have that kind of measures. So when we work with banks, I think right now we're kind of very okay. But in the early days, the first couple of banks we'll work with, it typically takes about 1 year or two from when we say let's start doing this until to the point where we say, oh, we're seeing the real value out of it. They're using on a day-to-day basis. It takes a year or two because we need to roll out the system in stages. We also need to monitor, once we deploy a system, what are the mistakes our AI will make, and if we make mistakes, how do we spot it? And if is that a serious mistake or is that it's okay mistake, we just ignore it? And how do we, if it's a serious mistake, how do we, get a human in the loop to step in, to correct the mistakes made by the AI? So we have lots of internal kind of exercises when we go through with the bank to make sure that this is actually we're not only shipping a technology that for a bank, but also everybody is comfortable that this technology adopted the bank. It's bringing significant value to the bank itself, but also to the customers. And at the same time, with all the benefits are out there, we're not introducing actual risks to the general market. So that's actually something about this. It's a fine balance when we need to figure out about bringing the business values, bringing AI in there, at the same time, making sure that the financial system is stable. We're not introducing actual risks, and we are responsible for the regulators' inquiries as well.
What do you think is the next phase that banks are going to need to use AI?
I think lots of, as we start working with banks, we do see that lots of, works that the banks are doing right now are quite manual. They're still quite manual and not so efficient. So based on over a couple of the past 2 to 3 years, banks are being very receptive about AI technologies. And of course, at the beginning, it was hard. Now we're having a better time working with all the large banks. So right now we're seeing accelerated adoption of our technologies and across the board general AI technologies. And banks also see the benefits of using AI to automate their work. It not only reduce their costs, but also increase the customer experiences in general. And as the banks are getting more used to it, and also they know how to manage the risks, how to manage the different risks and the different aspects about adopting AI, we're seeing an acceleration in adoption. So lots of the manual work could be automated by AI technologies. And in the next couple of 4 to 5 years, that's something I can see. And we can see that as banks getting more comfortable working with AI technologies, more and more use cases will come out. The use case I talk about, by the way, the use case I just described was not invented by me. It was created, it was invented. It was actually, brought up by our customers, by the bank themselves. Yeah. They have this idea. And we say, let's do a trial, let's do a pilot. Let's see whether this thing can actually work or not. So I will work with them for a couple of months. It worked, and we start rolling it out. So interesting, actually, we do see that lots of banks people who are very genius. They have lots of ideas. They just didn't have the necessary technologies and didn't have a right partner to work with them to deploy. Right now, with lots of technology like Fano for helping banks going faster in this journey.
In both Hong Kong and Singapore, the regulators, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority and MAS, have been very keen on getting banks to adopt RegTech or themselves to use SupTech, supervision technology, I guess is another buzzword. Where are we in that shift of regulator-driven support for RegTech? Is it having meaningful impact? Maybe you could just talk a little bit about what you think will be the next thing that has to happen for that program or that ambition to be realized.
Yep. Actually, regulators promoting RegTech, and regulators also adopting RegTech, which is what they will call it SupTech, is a big push for the entire industry. So one of the scenarios we come across is actually our technology is also being adopted by 2 regulators, actually 3 regulators at the moment. And so when they push for, when they use our technology, basically says, I'm going to use your AI technologies to conduct surveillance, audit, examinations for the authorized institutes, about those financial institutes, about what you're doing. Like, I'm going to use AI to monitor you on a larger scale. That basically said, yeah, it actually works. And that gives the banks much more confidence of the adopting technology, and also give them a strong pressure. So you have to move, because otherwise the regulators are speeding up, increasing their capabilities using AI technologies. If you are still doing the manual approach, you might run into trouble because you're now up to speed about what the regulators are doing. So that's actually where I see it's been something very successful. And I would say actually MAS is actually less successful, to be honest, less successful, less aggressive in adopting this approach than the regulators in Hong Kong. Regulators in Hong Kong are much more advanced in adopting technology for supervision. And that brought about a major impact to the financial institutes in Hong Kong.
Great. Last question. You and I met a year or two ago, and we were talking about Fano Labs. And I think at that point you were looking at an IPO. Since then, market conditions have been pretty rocky, but nonetheless, where are you with that exit dream?
We're actually, interestingly, we're not impacted by the market at the moment. So we're growing extremely fast. So right now we're basically just struggling to work with so many different banks that so many customers knock on the door and say, Miles, here's the money, let's work together. I say, could you please wait a little bit? We're busy. That's something that's happening at the moment. So actually it's good because one of the things about our applications on RegTech, especially regulation, is when the market is actually bad, there are more, investors, some investors actually lost money. The regulators will actually step up their regulation. They say, you lost money. Is that because of real market risk? Or is it because somehow the banks or security firms didn't handle your case properly, which led to your loss of financial losses? So regulators are actually step up on their supervision power during a market downtime, and that's actually give us a reason why give us a trigger about the banks should are more aggressively adopting our technologies to make sure they can conduct internal monitoring to make sure that at least they can eliminate any misconduct risks. They're just looking at the pure market risks. That's gonna be okay it's gonna be okay for regulators. It's because, at the same time.
Well, with those tailwinds, then, do you have a timetable for your own go-to market?
Yeah, we're looking, given our current growth speed, I think we're probably looking at next couple of 2 to 3 years for a potential exit. But we'll see. That's still a long way to go. A couple of years, 2 to 3 years, everything can change. We'll see about it.
Great. Well, good luck with that. Thank you for joining me today on DigFin VOX. Miles Wen, it's been a pleasure chatting with you.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.